Hello, this is Arul from VALOI, back again with part 3 of our series on using the easy35. This is the third and final part of taking the easy35 from the box to a final positive product. So in this part we're going to talk about this part where you've taken the pictures on the camera and they've landed on an SD card, or you've imported them to the computer, and now we have to take negatives to positives. I'm going to assume that you will be able to figure out how to do color positives, so we're going to focus on the negatives instead. So here we're going to demonstrate two types of software. We're using the standalone Film Lab app, and then we're going to use Negative Lab Pro for Lightroom. These are the two most commercial alternatives, the most polished alternatives, and we're using them because they're easy to use for beginners. However, there are other choices. There's a list of choices in the manual and also in on our website. If you're interested in finding out more about those alternatives for conversion software, you can go and read up on those. There are some good ones, some free ones, some paid ones, but we're using these because they're easy and quite polished. So I'm going to take the pictures into Lightroom and meet you there. Okay, so here we are in the library module in Lightroom. We've imported the pictures just using the SD card reader here, and we've gone to the library module with our folder of pictures. So as you can see, they're still negatives, so we have to process them into positives. We're going to do that here using Negative Lab Pro first, and then if you want to see the Film Lab app version of this process, you can click the timestamp to go there. So the first thing we're doing is white balancing for the background. This is in the Negative Lab Pro manual, which I highly recommend that you read. So I've just chosen the white balance tool in the library module and white balanced off the rebate here, and then I'm going to go click sync, make sure the white balance is ticked. Everything else we can just leave off, and then click synchronize. This will paste the same setting across all the pictures, and since we've taken everything on a consistent setting, they will all look the same. So this is important for Negative Lab Pro's processing. It assumes that you've already done this step, so you'll get the best colors by doing that. Now, opening Negative Lab Pro, provided you have it installed, you do need to go buy it and download it and install it in Lightroom. You go to File, Plugin, Extras, and then to Negative Lab Pro. This will open up the little application here on the side. Alternatively, you can use, so on Mac it's Option N, it just opens the menu. It's slightly different on Windows. Look at the documentation for your specific language. It also varies by language on the Windows and for your system. So with this menu, there's a few things to keep in mind. Most things we're going to leave on default. So this source is just referring to, are you using a scanner or digital camera? We're going to leave it on digital camera, obviously. The color model you can play around with. If you're scanning black and white, this is the option. You would use black and white, obviously. I typically leave it on basic. I find that to be the most neutral and a good editing starting point. Then there's pre-saturation. Again, I like to leave it on default. You can play around with it. It might be useful if you have particularly dull negatives, or if you like a particular style of low saturation or something like that. You can use that. Finally, the most important setting here is the border buffer. You can see it's set to preview and 15% here. If we untick the preview, you can see in the background here that the pictures expand. So what Negative Lab Pro is doing here is cropping in. This is not the final crop that it will spit out. It will crop in, do the conversion, and then remove the crop again. And this percentage refers to how much it's cropping. You don't have to have the preview ticked, but it's nice to show that all of the border around the image is cropped out, which is the goal. We don't want any black border or any rebate, which is the white part around, to confuse Negative Lab Pro. So I typically leave it on the preview, 15%. I can do more if I'm doing, for example, if I'm doing square negatives on medium format, I'll add 20%, but 15% is a good point. After that, there's nothing more you need to do before you convert. Just be aware there's an apply button down here. That's not very useful. At this point, you want to click the convert 18 negatives, and that will start the process. So in a second, I'll come back once it's done that. Okay, so that's the negatives converted. It takes about 2 to 3 seconds on a relatively quick computer, a bit more if you have a slower computer, but generally it's not more than a minute or two for a full roll of 36 exposures. So as you can see, I'm in the library module. I like this because it gives me a nice overview and kind of shows me the relationship between the pictures. You can go to the develop module and use the software there too, but you will only be able to see one picture at a time. The developer of Negative Lab Pro does say that the settings are smoother if you're in the develop module rather than the library module. So pick your poison there. We can see, so from here I'm going to go through some pictures and show you some of the common edits that I do. And right from the start here we can see 2 pictures with a lot of green in them, and you might be able to see that yes, there's green, but the gray areas and kind of the shadows and things are very magenta, and that's very, very common on pictures of greenery. I see a lot of pictures posted online from forests or from parks and that sort of thing, where all of the paths or the walkways, which should be brown or gray, are very pinkish magenta. It's not a good look. So we do want to focus primarily first on this temperature setting and tint setting here on the bottom. There are a lot of settings here for brightness and various shadows and whites and things you can play around with. That's more personal taste. I like getting a good starting point before we go there. So generally I will leave the white balance to auto neutral and then edit from there. You can play with this with these different settings. So this is an auto warm. You can see it makes it very warm. Sometimes it has less of an effect, sometimes it has more of an effect. Auto cool obviously makes it very cold. Auto average, it can be helpful. Generally I find that they're relatively, either they're fine or they're all off. There are also some just presets. So these first 4 ones, this is auto, does a bit of an analysis of the picture, tries to average things, whereas these bottom ones are just straight numbers. So you can see the standard one just gives you 17 and 10. That's just the value it throws at you. But let's do what I would usually do, which is start with an auto neutral and go from there. So because we have we have green background, Negative Lab Pro thinks, oh, lots of green, we need to balance that with lots of magenta, and that's why we get this magenta picture. So I'm going to dial back in some green here. So we're talking about quite small changes. So I'm using these arrows here, and we can see I just dialed in 5 points, and we took it from, okay, here it looks very magenta, to at 5.59 to just minus a half. And that just takes us into a much more usable, pleasant picture. Now we can see it's a little bit cold now that we've dialed in some green. So I'm going to add a little bit of warm yellow temperature. So somewhere around there, that's quite good. If you do want to preview your picture, you can just click apply, and that will apply all the settings. And then you can hit enter, and that will open the picture as a full picture. Again, you can go to the develop module if you want. Bit slow, and then again you jump back into Negative Lab Pro, and this is important. You want to make most of your changes in Negative Lab Pro. So I'm probably not going to make any further changes to that picture. I think it's quite nice, but you can see that this picture has exactly the same problem. So in this case I'll probably go through and sync the settings. So I'm going to go back to the library module and back to the grid view. And I'm going to click Command D, and now it's just deselect all these things. I'm selecting the first 2 pictures, going here, and then clicking Sync Settings. Sync Scenes is quite a different thing. We're talking about 2 different levels of processing here. Negative Lab Pro does the kind of conversion processing, and that's the scene sync, whereas the setting sync is kind of the post things that you do manually afterwards. So we're going to use this sync setting, and you'll see that that does exactly the same thing to the second picture, creating a nice kind of balanced image. Quickly, just if you want to add a slightly different look, if you prefer a more contrasty look, for example, I often use the pack-ons preset. It changes the contrast levels and darkness and that sort of thing. I quite like this pack-on preset. You can also go and do manual adjustments in there if you want to. Also note that you can do individual adjustments of white balance in the shadows, in the highlights and in the mids. That can be useful for the shadows sometimes, especially some films go a little magenta in the shadows, and you can go ahead and add a little bit of extra green there if you want. We're not going to go too deeply into that. I'm going to show you a few more pictures here that have similar but slightly different problems. Okay, so here I pulled up a picture that has kind of a similar problem in that it has a dominant color that's affected the rest of the picture and the processing. So here I'm talking about the sky. It's quite common in the same way we had a lot of greenery in the other picture, now we have a lot of sky, and it again causes problems. It has other problems, probably the negative is slightly underexposed, but primarily we're interested in fixing the white balance at this point. We can see that it's a little, you can see the sky is almost gray in a weird way. So it's seen, oh, it has a lot of blue here, so we need to add yellow. No. We're smarter than that. We want the picture to look like a sky, which should be blue. And just dialing in about 10 points of blue here, we're getting to a much more usable picture. I'm going to add a little bit of green as well. I can see that these greens look a bit dull in the foreground, and still the whites look nice and neutral. As I said, it does have some of the problems. Here the darks are quite dark, but as you can see there's not much we can do about that. They are a little underexposed, unfortunately, so we're probably going to leave them as they are. We can go to another image here with the same problem. Okay, this is tilted. I'm just going to tilt it back. Here again there's a lot of blue in the background, so the computer has thought, blue, add yellow. No, we don't like that. We're going to add quite a bit of blue back in, and then we can see that the tower is a little magenta here. I'm adding a few points of green, but I don't want to go too far because this side looks nice and neutral. So instead I'm just going to go into the shadows and add 3 points of extra green there, and you can see that that clears up the magenta shadow there. Okay, this is quite a bit of editing. You don't need to do this much. If you want your pictures to look very, very professional, this is what you would do. But there's not necessarily a need to do all of this processing. If you're happy with the results that come out of it just by default, which a lot of people are, and it depends a lot on the kind of scenes that you take pictures of, you might just want to add some contrast. Let's say you want to add 8 points of contrast to all your pictures. How do you do that? Well, same thing again, add the contrast. So we went from no contrast to a little bit of contrast, and then just sync settings. And that will take that contrast setting and just sync it across all of the images. Do be aware that it will also sync the other settings. So if you've just done what I did, which was do very careful white balance adjustments, it will remove those and add the sync. I do wish they added a sync option that had like a tick mark for what you want to sync. So once you're happy with all of your pictures, and maybe you want to go through and rotate them and make sure maybe you want to crop them. This is not a Lightroom tutorial, we're not going to go too deeply into how to process all your images, but once you've cropped and gotten ready to send your pictures elsewhere, you right click, so you highlight all the pictures you want to export, and then you right click and click export here. And Negative Lab Pro has these presets. You can use the NLP positive copy JPEG. That gives you a full resolution JPEG, and it saves it in the same folder that your pictures are in. You can also set up your own if you want. I have mine to set up to Google Photos, and they just sync automatically to my Google Photos, and then I can share them with friends and family. So the next thing we're going to do is jump into FilmLab app and do exactly the same thing with a slightly different interface. So I'll see you over in FilmLab app. Okay, now we're back here in FilmLab app, and we've imported our pictures. It's the same thing. If you open a folder, you get this kind of folder view. If you open just a single picture, you'll just be thrown straight into the editing view. But this folder view is very useful if you want to do more than one picture, because it allows you to apply batch processing. So by selecting all of the pictures, Command A in this case, we go to Image and then to Process As, and then Process as Color Negative. So you can see that I'll just flip all the pictures quite instantly to positives. However, they look a little off. So we're going to do the same thing and go through them bit by bit, and I'll show you a few quick edits that I would do, and also look at the rest of the editing interface. So clicking spacebar here, you get to the editing interface, and now from here you can move back and forth by using your arrow keys. At the top here, you have a setting called density. That's essentially your brightness. If you at some point feel like, oh no, I've gotten lost with my manual edits, you can click this thing at the top. This is auto apply settings, and that will just go back to its auto default. So in this case, picture's a little bright. I'm just going to take down the density, increase the density a little bit. And now we have the same problem again here. It's very magenta because of that green background. So we're going to dial in quite a bit of green. Brown there, that's pretty good. And again, now it's a little cold, so we're going to add a little bit of warmth. I think the shadow's a little too open on this particular picture, so I would drag the shadows down a little bit. Other than that, there are various settings for kind of detail and fine-tuning your saturation and contrast. There's also a choice for light source here. We are working on adding the easy35 light source into the software. That's hopefully coming soon. So if you're seeing this in the future, that might already be there. And then also the capture device profile is the type of camera you're using. So it will have presets for different sensors. In this case, it was already selected for a Sony sensor, which is what we're doing. It should auto-select based on the file that you're using. Fall of correction is if you're experiencing vignetting, you can use that to look at the documentation from FilmLab app to see how that works. The scanning flare protection is not useful for the easy35 because there is no flare. Your film is completely enclosed by the tube of the easy35. So with this editing, you could go back. So we've done our settings. If we wanted to apply all of them, we could go here, and so if we can first copy the setting by clicking Command C. So we can go up here, or no, it's not there. It's here. Copy, Command C, and then we can select all the pictures and paste those. So now we're pasting the settings that we applied. We can see that that looks not necessarily great. It looks good on this second picture, so these two look pretty good, but it doesn't look so great on these other pictures. And that's just because the processing isn't the same across all the pictures. So my primary way of doing, unless you're very consistent files, which this roll is not consistent, I would just go and process as color negative, and I will apply all the auto settings and then go through them picture by picture and do little changes. So this is maybe a little too blue, so I'm going to add some yellow. There's not much else I would do to this picture. This one, we have again the problem with a lot of blue, making it very yellow, so I'm going to dial in quite a bit of blue and maybe a tad of green. That looks quite good. And I'm just using my arrow keys going through here and doing the edits. Here in this picture, you can see that there's quite, I'm looking at this blue asphalt. It should obviously be gray, it's asphalt. It's typically not blue. So you can use that as a reference if you want, or there is also sun in the picture, so that you kind of have two different white balances you can choose to look at. I would probably go somewhere in between. Now the grass looks a little too yellow, so I might dial it back a little bit. But this is a subjective thing. You are talking about the final results of your pictures. It's something that the lab would do for you, and it's part of the service of scanning. Sometimes they do it less well, sometimes they do it very well, but they do generally not care as much as you do. So while you might spend 30 seconds on each picture, they might spend 5 seconds on each picture. you can dial in results that are more to your liking than what you would probably get from a lab. But it does take a little bit of time. Taking your time and this stage of the process can make you a lot happier with your pictures. Here's again that blue we're dialing in for the sky, and this one has actually handled the shadow a little bit better than Negative Lab Pro, I would say. But the brightness is a little weird. It's a little under what I would prefer. So, once you're happy with all of your pictures, you go back to the folder view by clicking this top left arrow, highlight all of your pictures. If you do actually want to export all of your pictures, you go to File, and then you can, here you can select your export format. If you don't want to export as TIFF, you can continue processing these in Lightroom. I would usually just export JPEGs, and then you can click Export here, and that will send them to the same folder that they're in, but in a export format that you can share. So that's a brief overview of FilmLab. As I said at the start of the video, there are other alternatives to FilmLab and Negative Lab Pro. You can go read about those on the website or in the manual. For now, that's it for processing your negatives, and I hope your results with the easy35 come out great. Do feel free to email us or get in touch, for example on Instagram, if you have problems with any part of the process, and we're sure to help you. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.